Good morning, everyone. If you'll take your seats. We're really excited about today. I think we've got, this will probably begin to fill a little bit more as people work their way through the gauntlet that is the security of the NIH. So hopefully we'll have more people coming in over the course of the next half hour or so. We also have a number of people on videocast, I know. We actually wanted this day to be a day for behavioral and social scientists at the NIH to get together, to highlight some of the research we funded over the last year, to network, to get to know each other a little bit more. So if you're on videocast and you're sitting at home in your pajamas with a cup of coffee, get dressed, come down, join us in person as much as you can. Take a shower first, then get dressed and come down. To kick off today, it's my pleasure to introduce the person who will do the welcoming and opening for our research festival today, Jim Anderson. This is the Deputy Director at NIH for Program Coordination, Planning, and Strategic Initiatives. This is the home of the offices, the coordination offices of the NIH, including OBSSR. So we've worked very closely together over the, last acting time, almost 3 years. That I've been in this role, so it's been great. What people don't know, Jim's been in that job since about 2010. He's also in internal medicine and hepatology, one of the authorities in primary research on tight junctions and paracellular transport. So I always remind myself when I'm trying to explain to Jim some of our research that at the point where I understand paracellular transport, I'll know that he's probably ready to understand more of the research that we do. That said, Jim has been just an amazing person in terms of supporting the office, supporting the research that we do at the NIH, and has been a great advocate for it over this course of time. So with no further ado, Jim.
Yeah, read it. We're doing video. Oh, I got you. Thanks. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. It's also been a great pleasure working with Bill. He's, I think, pumped a lot of energy into the office, and their strategic plan, I think, is an incredible document for leading us forward for the next 5 years. And it takes advantage of a lot of recent research and, I think, technological digital data use, and also moving behavioral social science closer to human application. So I want to welcome you to today's really historic event. This is the inaugural meeting of the Behavioral and Social Sciences Research Festival, and I'm looking forward to coming again next year. This event today is going to provide an opportunity to highlight and also to celebrate some of the recent NIH-funded research advances, both from the intramural and extramural activities that are very important in contributing to human health. Beyond the scientific presentations today, I noticed there's going to be time for discussions, for panels, to talk about where we are and where we need to go. And specifically, one of the foci of panel discussions that caught my eye was on what it's going to take to move research findings into practice. And I think that goal is much closer than we sometimes think, not just because of the growing awareness or understanding of fundamental insights into human behavior, but because of the rapidly advancing progress in digital capturing of behavior and social data, from little tiny devices that we're wearing to the commercialization of little tiny devices we're wearing, to the ability to use big data patterns and return that information, interpret it, and return it to individuals to influence their behavior to improve health. We have a large program at NIH that's helping us prepare or deal with big data issues. It's called Big Data to Knowledge, BD2K. It's a huge program. It's $106 million a year for this current year for training, technology development, policy development for data sharing, and so on. And I was at their open prize symposium yesterday, and again, I was so struck with how there is just the exploding capability of dealing with data, finding patterns in data, and it is just a golden age for behavioral social sciences. And I know Bill is on the top of that wave, riding his board, And I think this is just an amazing time for all of us in behavioral social science. So one of my favorite podcasts is the NPR's The Hidden Brain by Shankar Vedantam. So I found a quote that really resonated with me, and here it is. The point in doing all that research is that it actually has an effect in the real world. I don't have his accent. I wish I did. It's so mellow. I could try, but I don't want to. In the real world that actually connects with people and their real lives. And I think many universities are saying that it's not enough for us just simply to fund great research that makes it into prestigious journals, and that would be true of funders too, like NIH. It's really important to communicate those ideas to the public in a way that makes sense to them, and in my words, and that they can use to improve their health. So I want to recognize Bill and the staff of Behavioral Social Science Office and the coordinating committee for putting together what looks like a really spectacular event. And I'm anxious to come back next year, Bill. Thanks. I think you need this.
Thank you, Jim. See if I need, yeah. So I thought to kick off the day and get it started, this would be a little bit of sort of the state of the science, where we are, where we've been over this last year, and some of the things that the NIH has funded and focused on. You'll see some recency in all of this. This is our focus for things that have happened in FY16, and I thought it would be nice to sort of move it forward and think a little bit about the state of behavioral and social science here at NIH for FY16. So first of all, since we spent most of our lives at the Office of Behavioral and Social Science Research over the last year working on a strategic plan, I can't speak, I think, anywhere anymore without bringing this up and talking about it here lately. But I wanted to do an overview of all this for you so you had a pretty good sense of what we're trying to do there. As you may know, there's been two prior strategic plans at OBSSR, one in '97 during the days of Norm Anderson, and then in 2007 when Dave Abrams was director of OBSSR. So some of the earlier things that were part of those previous plans, I'll tell you that a couple of things that have resonated with me is one around biobehavioral perspectives in all of our research areas, this idea of sort of integrating our work within the larger biomedical research effort. And then some of the things from the 2000 plan you'll see actually carried forward, especially things like systems-related thinking and interdisciplinary research as part of the effort. The one thing I'll mention about the way we went about doing the strategic plan that I think is particularly important is the last point on this slide. It were the things that this office, OBSSR, was uniquely positioned to address. So you may not see your content area included. You may not see health disparities listed somewhere specifically because there's an institute that deals with health disparities. It doesn't mean that what we do is not supportive of that. It just means that we tried to focus the work that we were going to do on the things that we thought we were uniquely positioned to be able to do. This is the Strategic Planning Working Group on the right. So we had a really good group of people that guided us from the NIH throughout this process on how to get this done and the things that need to happen, not just within OBSSR, but the broader behavioral and social science research community. And then the expert panel, you'll recognize, I think, a number of the names on this panel who did just a wonderful job. Alan Leshner chaired it. We managed to coax him out of semi-retirement from AAAS to be able to help with that. So what you'll see in the strategic plan is some key aspects of this around 3 scientific priorities, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and some foundational processes, 4 of them, that we feel are sort of the things the office does day in, day out, over and over again as part of our work. Around those foundational processes, one in communication, and I'll highlight a couple of things that we've been doing over the last year and talk about them a little bit more as well. But one of the efforts in communication has always been, and has been for a number of years now, over a decade, the Matilda White Riley Excellence Lecture, as well as this year we began putting in an early stage investigator award for paper awards for that. Our coordination and integration efforts having to do with the Behavioral and Social Science Research Coordinating Committee, who has worked with us tirelessly on this event, but also throughout the year on various things. Our training efforts, I think people will be surprised to know that there are 11 summer training institutes that OBSSR funds. 8 through R25s and 3 through other mechanisms at this point. And then evaluating the impact of behavioral and social sciences through a number of things that are going on there as well. So the first scientific priority, improve the synergy of basic and applied behavioral and social science research. I think all of us recognize the fact that there's a bit of a broken pipeline between basic research and applied research. So the first thing I think we felt needed to be done is that the basic behavioral and social science research portfolio needed to be strengthened, gaps need to be identified, areas where we're not doing enough work, where the silos of the NIH tend to make it difficult to find where those gaps are and have them adequately funded, are one of the key things that the office needs to do. And the other is to increase the flow back and forth between basic and applied researchers. I put in here this primary outcome. I don't know that everybody can live with it, but it's one that I think is important, which is that when intervention researchers are doing their conceptual models for the intervention, they often base them on theoretical models. All well and good, all appropriate, and certainly better than the days when they didn't do that. But I think we can go a step further, and they can base it not just on theoretical models, but the basic science findings that determine what are the mechanisms for this behavior, and what are the trigger strategies, what are the levers that we have to be able to influence that mechanism moving forward. So just being able to be a little bit more sort of tied between basic and applied. Our second priority is in enhancing methods, measures, and data infrastructures. Jim alluded to this in the BD2K effort, and it's obviously an initiative that we have been and will continue to be closely aligned to and even improve that alignment moving further along. Data integration and replication in behavioral and social sciences has obviously been an issue of some importance. One of the things that I think is going to be particularly critical is looking at behavioral ontologies, our taxonomy, our terminology, trying to be much more consistent in what the constructs are that we talk about, how we measure them, what we're thinking about when we say these things. Development of new measurement approaches, and by that we don't mean yet another self-report measure of whatever your favorite construct is, but instead, more importantly, really new, innovative ways of measuring some of the things that we have to measure in the behavioral and social processes. And then the repertoire of methods that are available to social and behavioral researchers. I think as our data gets larger, it gets more temporally dense, it gets more difficult to sort of get our hands around. New methodologies need to be brought to bear to be able to do that. They're available, they're out there, we just need to take more advantage of them than we currently do. And then our third is to facilitate the adoption of behavioral and social science research findings in health research and practice. As Jim alluded to as well, this is an area of particular concern, I think. We have known for many years that the resources are not necessarily in place to put behavioral and social science research into practice as easily. There are public health clinics with rubbing dimes together to try to make some of these things work, and they don't have but so many resources and considerable difficulty being able to get these things out into the public context. Plus, the place where we're disseminating and implementing to is broader than just healthcare. Right? It includes communities and organizations and policymakers and other groups as well that we need to make sure we pay attention to as we move forward. So those are our scientific priorities as well. And then Francis was actually kind enough to write this editorial with me that came out on the same day we released the strategic plan on November 23rd, which is just a quick overview, not of the plan itself, but of some of the sort of transformative drivers that we think are changing the landscape of behavioral and social science research moving forward. So let me shift gears. I want to talk a little bit about behavioral and social science research funding. We all kind of go, oh, things are so rough. They're really not as bad as you might think. This is the overall funding in behavioral and social science research and in basic behavioral social science research funding by fiscal year, based on RCDC criteria. Now, of course, some of you may go, well, maybe some of those things are not necessarily so behaviorally and social science oriented, but it's a pretty good indicator, and it's clearly the one that at the NIH we use on a regular basis to report. And what you'll see is a gradual increase in behavioral and social science research over the last few years, especially since FY13 moving forward. The other thing has been an increase in basic behavioral and social science research, particularly in the last couple of years. So I think we've seen some nice improvements in that, and we're approaching essentially $4 billion of grant funding that has a behavioral and social science component to it. And that funding is distributed across a number of institutes. all the way from institutes as large as NIMH in terms of funding for FY16, and this is new competitive funding. This is just the funding that was done this year, and all the way through. It's an interesting process, having been in this role, looking at how we coordinate the effort of behavioral and social sciences across the NIH, because it's scattered about all of these institutes and centers in various ways. Now, one of the things I wanted to do was not just give you graphs. I wanted to show you some of the exciting research that was funded this year. So when I looked at all this, and I said, okay, well, I'll highlight a few. There's 2,600 grants funded in 2000 and over 2,600 grants funded in 2016 by the various institutes in behavioral and social science research. It was hard enough just to read all the titles of those in time. And so then I went, well, I'll take one from each institute, and I'll do that. Well, that's 27, and I don't have enough time for that either. So what I did was, let me go back. What I did was I thought, let me focus on the folks that don't fund as much behavioral and social science research, or which you might actually be surprised that they fund behavioral and social science research, and highlight some of their work. So going from NINR and working your way up on this chart, a few of the examples of some of the research that was funded this year alone. So this is from nursing. This is tailored tailored health self-management interventions for highly distressed family caregivers. And this is caregivers of bipolar disorder patients who have an excessive burden that they experience on a regular basis caring for these patients and dealing with them. And there's very little infrastructure other than the actual patient's family most of the time to help with managing these patients over time. The things we currently do, family and educational interventions, have had a minimal effect, and there really is very little tailored intervention work that's been reviewed at this point. So this study is actually a four-arm study: no intervention, education, usual care, self-management training based on the need that they, as they understand it from the patient or from the caregiver, and then self-management training based on the preferences of the caregiver. What kind of aspects of things are things that they consider to be most important that they want to pay attention to, with outcomes at 6 and 12 months, and health outcomes in the caregivers themselves, as well as the association of caregiver needs with the preferences and with contextual factors, so that eventually they can have predictive models for what the likely needs and preferences are of these caregivers or bipolar patients, and move forward being able to predict that ahead of time and give them the sort of resources and the interventions that they need. This is from NIAID, modeling the coupled dynamics of influenza transmission and vaccination behaviors. Those of you from the early days of the health belief model, this will not surprise you, the first line, which is that seasonal influenza vaccination decisions are largely motivated by attitudes about risk and benefits of that. And that previous work that this particular group has done has confirmed a strong dynamical interplay, not just between behavior and getting vaccinated, the influenza epidemiology, and social network structures. And so this research will enhance and refine agent-based models of heterogeneous samples in a 4-year longitudinal study, which will much more temporally densely capture decisions about vaccination, attitudes and beliefs about vaccination behaviors, social structures, and social networks, and be able to eventually model and evaluate how people make these decisions a little bit better about influenza vaccination, how we can improve that moving forward. This is work from NIGMS, from General Medical Sciences. So, some of the work that needs to be done is not actually doing the research; it's building the research infrastructure to make it easier to do the research. And this is a project called HealthPop, a geocoding spatial workflow and contextual data integration platform. As many of you know, or those of you who have ever worked with GIS systems and that sort of thing, they're clunky, they're difficult, it's hard for most of the typical researcher, especially one who's not comfortable with GIS-type data, to be able to pull that into their study and use it readily. And so this project actually works on building an end-to-end, free, transparent, integrated web-based platform that allows researchers and practitioners to geocode health and survey data and could both construct and assess contextual variables in that context. So a really nice and interesting way to sort of improve and facilitate the type of research that we do looking at geocoding and location data. This is a study from NIEHS, from Environmental Sciences, a grant that they just funded again this year. All of these are grants funded in FY16. This is telomere dynamics as indicators of social adversity in environmental epidemiology. And I've forgotten now what PBDE stand for, but a fairly common toxic, I can't remember either, early life exposure to stressors. So both of those things, both some of the chemical sort of toxins or chemical exposures and also early life stressor exposures, disrupt endocrine system homeostasis and adverse neurodevelopmental endpoints. And there's been a paucity of exposure assessment methods for quantifying social conditions, as we all know in this field. And so they're looking at telomeres and how they can actually look at those as a potential objective approach to examining the biological manifestations of social factors and study the relationship between pre- and postnatal exposures both to PBDEs and social adversity, measuring questionnaire data, telomere dynamics on cognitive and behavioral performance using an existing data set. This is just an RO3, so this is a nice example of taking existing data, using a small grant to do sort of novel and unique analyses of that existing data set. This is from our friends at the National Eye Institute. We would probably go, well, I'm surprised that Eye has a fair amount of research, but they do have a fair amount of research in behavioral and social sciences. This is a study on at-risk driving and compensatory strategies in older adults with glaucoma, in which they'll study both people with varying severity of glaucoma as well as control drivers using on-road driving tests to assess behavior in objective, standardized, individual, and actually real-life manner, and do a comprehensive clinical assessment of vision and non-vision factors associated with driving, including that cognition, mobility, the kind of things that we typically sort of measure in the field. Identify the type and frequency of at-risk driving areas, determine vision and non-vision factors associated with it, and identify effective compensatory strategies used for safe glaucoma drivers so that we can actually improve the way people with glaucoma are able to sort of lengthen the time they're able to sort of drive with the condition and do that safely. This is from our friends at NCCIH. This is a study on mindfulness and migraine, a randomized controlled trial. As many of you know, migraine is one of the leading causes of disease burden in the country, and mindfulness-based stress reduction increasingly shown to be effective in a number of functional disorders and might be an adjunctive therapy for patients with migraine headaches as well. So they're doing a latent class analysis to identify subgroups of migraine patients defined by their comorbidities, randomized to mindfulness-based stress reduction intervention or usual care, and then outcomes at 4, 8, and 12 months post-randomization. Looking primarily at headache frequency at the 4-month for primary, but looking at secondary endpoints including pain, disability, quality of life, mood, and sleep quality. I'm only have 10, just so you know. But these are all, I have to tell you, going through 2,600 titles, I was truly impressed with the breadth, the quality, the amount of behavioral and social science research that the NIH funds, and that's just this year, just new funding for this year. Epigenetic basis of pain vulnerability. This is work from dental and craniofacial research, looking at individual pain vulnerability mediated by epigenetic changes that are induced by prior stressful events and pain experiences. So whether there's been epigenetic changes as a result of prior pain experiences and prior stressful events, and whether that leads to differential responses to subsequent pain stimuli and analgesic drugs. So they're looking at DNA methylation and how that mediates gene repression and individual variants and vulnerability to developing chronic pain. And by doing that in rat and mouse models, looking at orofacial pain to establish a functional link between pain and stress, determining whether the animal is vulnerable to chronic pain or also vulnerable to stress and developing negative emotions of affective pain. So it's a really nice study of those areas looking at this kind of work moving forward and some of the epigenetic work that, again, sort of integrates a lot of the behavioral and social science work with genetic work very nicely. This is another sort of resource study. This is from NIBIB. And this is crowdsourced annotation of longitudinal sensor data to enhance data-driven precision medicine and behavioral health. This is Stephen and Tilly's work. As you know, we have this large amount of sensor data coming in its raw form, and a number of people have argued it needs to stay in its raw form, at least as it's being collected and stored, so that we can do new things with it as we're able to understand better how to summarize it, aggregate it, put it together in useful ways. But that takes a lot of work. Machine learning is not magical. It requires somebody to initially do the training set to be able to get to that machine learning. And so what Stephen and colleagues have done at Northeastern is do a study, a project here in which they're going to use crowdsourcing to determine the feasibility, usability of mobile and online crowdsource-based systems for cleaning, and annotating that behavioral data collected from motion sensors, mobile phones, and other mobile devices, and demonstrate how individuals playing mobile and online games, the crowd, can collectively, affordably, and incrementally clean and add important metadata to raw sensor data that has been passively collected from individuals. And I think this is my last. I think I've got one more after this. This is integration of genomics and the environment. This is a large study out of NHGRI. We all know that environment's a major contributor to human disease, but largely ignored in some of the whole genome approaches that we have to date. This will evaluate the mechanisms by which environment influence genomic function, focusing on two important exposures: diet, in relationship to metabolic disease and cancer, and then stress related to neuropsychiatric disease. And then develop a new foundational experimental mouse model for understanding gene-environment interaction and being able to do that with some new statistical methods and novel approaches to that as well. Oh, and then finally, this is from the Fogarty Center in international work. This is a study on domestic violence and culturally appropriate prevention in Pakistan, looking at intimate partner violence and the high rates, particularly in Pakistan and other associated regions, and as a determinant of poor developmental outcomes among children who witness intimate partner violence in early childhood or who are exposed to it in utero. And then pregnancy has also been demonstrated to be a period of increased vulnerability to intimate partner violence. So they're addressing a dearth of even formative knowledge needed to provide the basis for effective IPV prevention. Okay. All right, so just a sampling of 2,600, but ones that I thought you should see just as an example of some of the breadth of the types of funding that the NIH has done over the last year. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the funding announcement highlights over 2016 as well. Most of you have been quite busy, it turns out, and have a number of funding announcements that have been released and that are currently active in 2016. These are just some initial examples of some of the ones. I probably am not exhaustive here, but wanted to at least give you some sense of some of the efforts that are going on in terms of funding announcements that have been released in the last year. That's one set. This is another set of them and some of the work that's going on. I'll give you a second to read some of those. I won't read all those to you this morning, especially since people were worried whether I was going to get here this morning because I was on a late flight from Chicago last night. So my reading capabilities are a little attenuated. And then a third set of these. So a lot of work across all of your institutes and centers to fund specific research and identify gaps and focus on those. OBSSR has also done a number of projects or FOAs that we've led, looking at multiple chronic health conditions, medication adherence, validation of mobile and wireless tools, population health interventions, system science work, education and health, basic biopsychosocial mechanisms and processes for management of chronic conditions. A couple of these have actually come out of the OpNet effort as well, and then methodology and measurement and behavioral and social sciences. So those are the ones that OBSSR has taken a leading role in, but of course we can't do this without all of you and the various institutes and centers that help support that, coordinate it, buy into the concepts as we're building them, and work with us in developing them and moving them forward. We also at OBSSR, as you all know, do a fair amount of co-funding. This is just one example of, this is from our work over the last 3 years in terms of co-funding efforts. We typically co-fund a little over 100 grants from OBSSR as per your request as they come in. You'll see some variation from year to year. That's kind of expected and appropriate. There are times where some people have, or some institutes have fairly large requests, and we're responding to those. So you'll see that in 2014, we probably spent our most co-funding money at NCI. 2015, we spent most of our money with NICHD, or a significant portion of it. And this last year with NINDS, particularly with the BRAIN Initiative around some of the work that was beginning to move the BRAIN Initiative out into behavior a little bit more, and this was particularly around language processing and that sort of thing. So we thought those were some really good efforts that we wanted to fund moving forward as well. So a lot of themes throughout that. Again, I won't read all of these to you, but they run the gamut of everything from very basic neuroscience all the way through the social determinants of health and many things in between in terms of the type of things that we've co-funded at OBSSR over the years. And we've been busy on a few other little things along the way that I thought you would like to see. As I noted before, we had, I think, a really nice Matilda White Riley Award, and thanks to Bill Elwood and Erica Spots in the office, particularly for putting this together this last year. Karen Lehrman from University of Pennsylvania was the awardee this year for the Matilda White Riley Lecture. And then, as I said, this was our first year of taking people who are early stage investigators and highlighting papers that they had published in the last year. And so these are our awardees for that as well. We also have been trying to stay busy with the OBSSR connector and kind of keep you informed via blogs, either from me or on Research Edge or other blogs that staff do to kind of keep you up to date on some of the things that are going on. We've been involved in a number of large projects, the ABCD initiative, the Precision Medicine initiative, now called All of Us, the Brain Initiative, and the ECHO project, all things in which we played a role, and I think many of you in this audience have played a role as well. So it's been really helpful to have sort of the coordination of those efforts and ensure that behavioral and social factors are included in those large projects moving forward. And I just also want to mention, because we really did this as sort of an afterthought, and it turned out to be so nice that we're going to keep doing it. So Linda Collins and Danny Amaral and others had done a week-long training institute in May, and a lot of people from the NIH weren't able to go to it because it filled up so quickly, and we thought, well, it really should be for extramural investigators. And so Linda and Danny offered to just provide a one-day training specifically for NIH people, so they could learn about a new methodology, in this case, optimization designs and some of the approaches there. Really well attended, really nicely done, and so it's one of the things that we'll carry forward from year to year, is just a day-long training for NIH staff, particularly around a new methodology as we move forward. And I think, though we haven't nailed this down, that'll probably be on GIS-related methodologies for this next year moving forward. We've also been busy hiring. So these are the new people in our office. Don't they all look lovely and smiling? And what a nice group. We've been really fortunate to add some really nice and very strong scientists and people to the office over the last year. Katie Morris, who, by the way, is the person who has pulled the vast majority of all of this together for this particular research festival. Kate Blazinski, Jessica Krogstad, Dana Wolf-Hughes. Liz Janexi just joined us only like a month ago, less than a month ago, from NCI. Dana Green and Kate McNeil. So new people in the office. But I have to say a word about the people who have weathered the storm over the last, 3+ years. It's not hard to lose. It's hard to lose a director, have an acting director for 16 months, then try to figure out what this new director is going to do, have him sort of re-scramble everything in the office around and somehow hang in there and do the things that need to be done. There's been a great group of sort of core people that help hold things together for OBSSR over many, many years. So I want to thank them all. And I think with that, I will end, and we'll get to the scientists that everybody's been waiting to hear from today. So thank you all.